Fog hung thickly over the coastline near Fort Monroe when Samantha Fleming paused in front of her new room. A tattered navy blue duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Her phone flashed the address, the temporary company housing of Conlight Logistics, where HR had assigned her. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to early mornings and long days. Before we continue, please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your opinion inspires us to do better. The hallway was dimly lit. The only source of light, an old lamp hanging from the ceiling, flickered every few seconds. Samantha paused at the door, hearing laughter inside. She hesitated for a moment, but she pushed the door open and walked in anyway. 4 guys in identical gray t-shirts sat on the beds. They looked up at the same time. Their gazes narrowed, as if she'd found herself in a place she wasn't supposed to enter. They were between 25 and 27 years old, and each of them had that confident air of young men who believe the world should bend to their rules. Kyle Bradford moved first. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a short haircut and a heavy gaze. He stood directly in her path, arms crossed over his chest. The others moved behind him, blocking the exit. A coordinated movement without words. They had done something like this many times before. Samantha maintained a calm tone. She explained that she had been assigned here temporarily and pulled out her phone to show the HR order. The screen clearly displayed her name, position, dates, and the address of this very room. Bradford leaned closer. Too close. "You're in the wrong place," he said defiantly. The room seemed to shrink around the sound. Samantha tried to turn toward the door. Her father's words flashed through her mind. "The best fight is the one you walk away from." But the boys stood tightly together, their bodies frozen in a show of strength. Ryan Collins, standing to Bradford's right, crossed his arms and grinned. Dexter Harris, the largest of the 4, a true giant with a square jaw, shifted his weight, making the narrow space seem even smaller. Tony Parker remained against the far wall, his face uncertain, his eyes darting from Samantha to Bradford and back again. Samantha held out the phone again so they could check. The light from the screen fell directly on their faces. Bradford barely glanced at the screen before waving it off. "I don't care what it says. This is our room, and you're not welcome here." Collins moved even closer. Harris stood by the door, his massive frame filling the doorway. Parker looked as if he wanted to say something, but one sharp glance from Bradford silenced him. The air grew thick, as if before a thunderstorm. Samantha stood firmly, her voice low. Her legs were slightly apart, her weight evenly distributed. A fighting stance she'd adopted not consciously, but out of habit. Her arms hung loosely at her sides, ready to react at a moment's notice. The imbalance in the room continued to grow. The interns sank deeper into their assumptions and pride. They saw a woman before them, short, thin, with neatly pulled back dark hair and a calm face. For them, this was sufficient reason to consider her weak. Bradford took another step forward. Now the distance between them was no more than 30 centimeters. "Get out of here before I throw you out myself," he hissed through his teeth. Samantha exhaled slowly, leaned toward her bag, and reminded herself of her father's calm voice. She repeated his words silently, like a mantra. She picked up her bag and turned toward the door. Her movements were slow and careful. The interns watched her with a mixture of confusion and irritation. To them, her attempt to leave was an admission of defeat. Collins grinned and nudged Harris. Harris nodded, his face twisting into a satisfied grin. Every step toward the exit seemed heavier. Samantha counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4. There were only a few meters left to the door. She was almost to the doorway when Bradford closed the distance with a sharp lunge. His hand grabbed her shoulder, his fingers digging in so hard she felt a sharp pain. He spun her around before she could react. The bag fell to the floor with a dull thud. The wall hit her in the back. The world rocked. And his other hand closed around her throat, his fingers pressed against her windpipe, cutting off her air supply. Samantha felt her vision begin to darken. Behind him, faint laughter emanated from Collins and Harris. Harris pulled out his phone, as if he were about to film the scene. "Show her who's boss," Collins encouraged. Parker stood frozen near the shelves. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. He took a hesitant step forward, but fear of his comrades held him in place. The pressure on her neck, the shock of hitting the wall, and the heat of Bradford's anger marked the moment the situation crossed the point of no return. A thought flashed through Samantha's mind. He gave me the right to defend myself. Bradford's grip tightened momentarily, but Samantha had already mentally shifted from restraint to controlled action, a switch made automatic by years of training. Panic receded, replaced by icy calm. She moved one hand between his forearm and her neck, creating a small pocket of space. The movement was quick, calculated to the millimeter. Then she twisted his wrist sharply. The principle of leverage, a small force applied at the right point, produces a huge result. His fingers weakened as pain shot through his knuckle. She drove her palm up into the soft tissue beneath his jaw. The blow was short and precise. Bradford's head jerked back, his eyes momentarily unfocused. As he reflexively hunched forward, she drove her knee up into his solar plexus with a focused burst of force. The air rushed from his lungs. His body buckled. He collapsed to the floor, gasping for short, shocked breaths like a fish out of water. Samantha didn't even look at him. Her peripheral vision registered movement to the right. Dexter Harris lunged forward. 120 kilograms of pure muscle. The floor beneath him vibrated as he moved, but momentum could be harnessed. One of the first rules of jiu-jitsu is to never resist force directly, but to channel it where you need it. She angled herself so that her leg caught in his movement. Her foot slid between his legs just as he took a step. His forward thrust carried him over the balance point she'd chosen for him. Her shoulder slammed into his chest with a clean, directional thrust. The impact echoed across the room, drowning out the last of the laughter. Harris lay stunned, his eyes unfocused. His head hit the metal bedpost. Blood flowed from his cut eyebrow. He groaned, but made no attempt to rise. Ryan Collins froze in the middle of the room, his weight shifting back and forth. His face was contorted with both fear and anger. He'd seen what had happened to his two comrades. But his pride wouldn't let him retreat. Samantha entered his hesitation before it could turn into action. She caught his wrist and guided it into a standing lever on his arm. The grip was quick and precise. She twisted his arm inward, creating pressure on his elbow. His body dropped to one knee. The pressure was building, not enough to cause injury, but enough to show that one wrong move would make the pain worse. That's it, enough!" He breathed out a plea. She let go of him. Collins fell to the floor, clutching his arm and wincing in pain. Tears welled up in his eyes, but he held them back. Tony Parker leaned against the shelves, raising both hands in the universal gesture of surrender. His face was chalk white. His lips trembled. "I didn't want to. I didn't participate. Samantha nodded at him, not forgiveness, but acknowledgement of his choice. The room fell into a heavy silence. Bradford was still wheezing on the floor. Harris clutched his head, blood trickling between his fingers. Collins sat with his back against the wall, massaging his arm. Every movement she made was based on practice, leverage, and calm intent, not anger. The fight lasted only a few seconds. Samantha picked up her bag, checked her phone, and headed for the door. No one tried to stop her. She stopped in the hallway, pulled out her phone, and dialed security. Her voice was calm as she explained the situation. Then she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes for a few seconds. Her hands trembled slightly, a natural response. She controlled her breathing, and the tremors quickly subsided. Senior Manager Douglas Weston entered the room 10 minutes later. He was followed by 2 security guards and a nurse. Weston was a man in his 50s, with graying temples and a tired look. But behind this weariness lay an iron will. His gaze swept the room in a quick survey. 3 interns on the floor, one clutching his throat, one his head, one his arm. One frozen against the shelves, and Samantha Fleming, standing by the door, breathing controlled. Red finger-shaped marks were already appearing on her neck. Every trainee froze under his presence. Weston possessed an authority that filled small spaces and left no room for excuses. He headed toward Samantha first. "Are you okay?" Do you need medical attention? Samantha gave her name, position, and department. She handed him the phone with the open temporary housing order. She explained everything briefly and clearly, without unnecessary emotion. Weston read each line, his jaw clenched. He nodded to the nurse. She approached Samantha, examined her neck, and checked her pulse and blood pressure. There are signs of strangulation, but the airway is intact. I recommend a cold compress and observation for 24 hours. The controlled anger in Weston's eyes grew sharper. He turned to the interns, his face hard as stone. Stand up. Bradford and Collins struggled to their feet. Harris tried to stand, but his head spun and he sank back to the floor. The nurse examined the wound. He needs stitches. I'm calling an ambulance. Weston nodded, then continued, addressing the interns. You assaulted a senior instructor at this company. You ignored official orders. You created a hostile work environment. You violated every safety and professional conduct policy in this organization. His words fell like hammer blows. Do you understand that you could not only be fired, but also be prosecuted for assault? Bradford opened his mouth to say something, but Weston raised his hand to stop him. Shut up. I don't want to hear your excuses. He pulled out his phone and called security, requesting additional security and transportation to take Harris to the hospital. If anyone tries to leave, it will be considered an attempt to flee the scene of an incident, and the consequences will be even more serious. When he turned back to Samantha, he spoke in a calmer voice. Ms. Fleming, I apologize on behalf of the company. This is unacceptable. We will take all necessary measures. Samantha nodded. Thanks. I just need to get to a permanent place to live. I'll personally organize your move right now. We have a vacant apartment in a good area. You'll go there with security, and all your belongings will be delivered within an hour. He paused, looking into her eyes. And again, I'm sorry you had to go through this. The days that followed unfolded with the rigid rhythm of corporate procedure. Tech-trained security group had a strict code of conduct, and any violation was dealt with at the highest level. 3 days later, Kyle Bradford and Dexter Harris appeared before the disciplinary committee. Harris still wore a bandage around his head, hiding 12 stitches. They entered the courtroom without the bravado they'd displayed in the room. Their shoulders were tense, their voices quiet. The HR director began. Kyle Bradford, Dexter Harris. The investigation revealed that you committed an unprovoked assault on the company's senior instructor, Samantha Fleming. You used physical force, endangered life and limb, disregarded official documents, and acted in a group, which exacerbates your actions. This behavior is inconsistent with our company values and safety standards. Both were fired. The decision was unanimous. Furthermore, the company handed over the case materials to the police, and the prosecutor's office considered opening a criminal investigation. Bradford tried to object, claiming it was a misunderstanding and that he meant no harm. But the company's lawyer coldly cut him off. The marks on Miss Fleming's neck, the medical reports, and the witness statements indicate otherwise. You have no excuse. Harris was silent, looking at the floor. He realized that his life had just been turned upside down. Ryan Collins received a severe reprimand. His punishment included mandatory 3-week professional conduct training. He made the decision with stunned calm, clearly aware of how close he had come to more severe consequences. Tony Parker received a different treatment because he did not join the attack. But his failure to act was still considered a lapse in judgment. He was required to submit a written statement and undergo 2 weeks of leadership training. Parker approached the process with quiet sincerity, recognizing that his silence had cost him more than he expected. He wrote his statement at length, choosing his words carefully. I was afraid that if I intervened, they would turn against me. I was afraid of losing their friendship, but now I understand that true friendship is not built on silence in the face of injustice. The story became a topic of discussion at all levels of the company. At the weekly staff meeting, the CEO personally read the statement. We do not tolerate violence, discrimination, or intimidation of any kind. Every employee has the right to a safe work environment, and we will protect this right by any means necessary. Samantha settled into the permanent instructor's apartment at the far end of the complex. The space was simple and functional. A 1-bedroom apartment with a small kitchen, a bathroom, and large windows overlooking the park. For Samantha, that was enough. She didn't need luxury, only functionality. She sorted through her gear with the same calm concentration. She hung the uniform in the closet, arranged the books on the shelf, and placed a photograph of her father on the table. In the picture, he stood in uniform, smiling at the camera, a rare moment when his serious expression softened. She touched the frame with her fingers and whispered, "Thanks, Dad. You taught me right." By the end of the week, the story of what happened in that room had spread throughout the tech-trained security group training unit with the speed of something too unexpected to ignore. Some trainees initially dismissed it, convinced it had become a rumor that exaggerated the details more than the truth. But too many people witnessed the aftermath. Harris being taken away in an ambulance with a head wound, Bradford walking around clutching his throat, Collins unable to raise his arm above his shoulder for a week, and Parker told anyone who would listen how it really happened, without embellishing or hiding his own shame. Skepticism vanished when they learned she was a certified senior martial arts instructor. Furthermore, it turned out Samantha held a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, was a state junior champion, and had logged over 5,000 hours on the mat over the past 15 years. Weston, when he called her for a formal report, asked, "Where did you learn this, Miss Fleming?" And then Samantha told her story, briefly, without unnecessary details. About a small town in South Texas, where the wind never stopped blowing across the desert plains. About her father, Michael Fleming, a Marine who served during the Iraq War. About how he taught her the basics of self-defense back in elementary school. "He showed me how to stand correctly, how to distribute my weight, how to use my opponent's movement against him. Strength isn't everything," he said. "What's more important is knowing how and when to use it." About a Brazilian jiu-jitsu gym owned by a former wrestler named Carlos Ramirez. About how she was drawn to the idea that technique could overcome force if applied patiently. About tournaments where she learned to maintain even breathing when everything around her was turning into chaos. About how she became a state champion by the age of 16. Carlos said, "Jiu-jitsu is not about winning. It's about not losing to yourself." About tech-trained security group, where she started as an instructor at 22. About how she taught employees the basics of self-defense, restraints, and disarmament. About how her program included not only physical training, but also psychological training. How to remain calm in critical situations, how to make split-second decisions, and how to maintain control. Weston listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded with deep respect. Now it's clear. They didn't have the slightest chance. The shift in attitude was subtle but noticeable. The trainees began approaching her classes with a new level of respect. Whereas some had previously shown up lazily, the room was now packed 15 minutes before class. Everyone wanted to learn from her. Everyone wanted to understand how she did it. Samantha never brought up the incident. Whenever anyone tried to bring up that evening, she gently but firmly steered the conversation back to technology. That was in the past. We are here to learn about the present. Her demonstrations remained patient and clear. Every movement was carefully considered, every explanation precise. She took her time, giving each student as much time as they needed to understand. Several interns approached her after class to ask if the rumors were true. Yes, that's true. But what's more important isn't what happened, but what you learned from it. The respect she earned came not from recounting the moment in that room, but from how she carried herself afterwards. Her steady voice, confident posture, and consistent professionalism set the tone for every room she entered. One of the senior instructors, Marcus Holloway, who had been with the company for 20 years, approached her 2 weeks after the incident. They were standing in an empty gym after class. "Samantha, I want you to know that what you did wasn't just the right thing to do in self-defense. It was a lesson for all of us, a lesson in what it means to stay calm when everything around you is going wrong." She nodded, unsure of what to say. Praise always left her flustered. "Thank you, Marcus. I just did what my father and my teachers taught me. That's why you're a real professional." Tony Parker found Samantha outside the training building late in the afternoon, when the sun had dropped low enough to cast long shadows on the asphalt. The air was warm, smelling of freshly cut grass from the nearby park. He walked toward her with an unsteady step, his face bearing the tension of a man who realized he had failed to act when it mattered most. Samantha stopped near the bench and waited, giving him space to speak. She sat down, inviting him to do the same. Parker sat down next to her, leaving a respectable distance between them. He was silent for a few seconds, collecting his thoughts. Then he took a slow breath. "Miss Fleming, I don't know where to begin. I'm ashamed. I'm ashamed for standing there and doing nothing when I saw something wrong happening." His voice trembled, and Samantha could see him struggling with his emotions, trying to find the right words for something that had no simple explanation. Parker clenched his hands into fists in his lap, then unclenched them again, as if trying to physically release the tension that had built up within him over the past few days. He continued, explaining that he had sensed the wrongness of the situation from the start, but had frozen under pressure from his comrades, choosing silence when he should have chosen action. "I knew Bradford was going too far. I knew we all were going too far. But I was afraid. Afraid that if I said something, they would turn on me. Afraid of losing their respect. And now I realize how stupid that was. What respect can you lose from people who act like animals?" His voice cracked once as he described the shame that followed him through every training session after the incident. "I couldn't sleep. Every night I woke up and saw you standing by that wall, and me doing nothing. It haunts me. I keep asking myself the same question. What if he hadn't stopped? What if you hadn't been able to protect yourself? I would have lived my whole life knowing that I could have prevented it, and didn't." The honesty in his words made the moment harder than any punishment he'd received from the company. Samantha listened without interrupting, her expression steady and calm as she allowed him to finish. She saw tears glistening in his eyes, but he held them back, unwilling to cry in front of her. His jaw tensed with the effort of maintaining control, and she knew this conversation had cost him more than he could express. When he finally fell silent, she waited a few seconds, giving him time to compose himself. A breeze blew through the park, bringing with it the scent of freshly cut grass and distant flowers. Somewhere in the distance, children laughed, their voices a reminder that life goes on despite moments that seem insurmountable. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but firm, reminding him that real leadership begins before a situation gets out of control, and that doing the right thing often begins with one person willing to speak up, even when it's hard. "Tony, what happened in that room wasn't just Bradford's or Harris's fault. It was the result of neither of you stopping it sooner. Groupthink is dangerous precisely because it blurs individual responsibility. Everyone thinks someone else will intervene, and in the end, no one does." She paused, looking out at the park in front of them, where children were playing on the playground, their laughter drifting over the bench, creating a contrast to the seriousness of their conversation. "But you know what? You came to me. You admitted your mistake. And that takes courage. More courage than throwing a fist in someone's face. Anyone can punch someone in the face in a fit of anger, but coming to the person you've wronged, looking them in the eye, and admitting your weakness, that takes real strength." She turned to face him, her gaze direct but not judgmental. "You have one more chance to decide what kind of employee and what kind of person you want to be. Don't miss it. Because there might not be a next time. Life doesn't always give second chances, Tony. Take advantage of this one." The message landed with a weight that was neither harsh nor gentle, but somewhere in between, a balance between compassion and demandingness, between understanding and expectation. Parker nodded, and a clearer sense of responsibility settled within him. He felt something shift inside him, as if the weight he'd been carrying had become lighter, not because it had disappeared, but because he now had a way forward. "I won't let you go, I promise," he said, and there was a conviction in his voice that hadn't been there when he started talking. "I want to be the kind of person who intervenes, who doesn't remain silent when he sees injustice. I want to be like you, calm but strong, in control but not controlled." He stood up, extended his hand, and Samantha shook it. His handshake was firm, and he looked into her eyes, unwavering. That simple gesture held more meaning than any words. Acknowledgement, gratitude, a promise. He left with a more stable posture than when he arrived, and Samantha watched him for a moment before turning back toward the building, ready to return to her duties with the same calm professionalism that shaped every aspect of her work. But something about this conversation touched her more than she expected. Perhaps because she saw in Parker a reminder that people are capable of change, that mistakes don't have to define a person forever if they're willing to learn from them. Returning to the building, she walked through familiar hallways, where the walls were adorned with photographs of graduates from various years. Faces looked back at her. Men and women of all ages and backgrounds, united by a single goal, learning to protect themselves and others. She paused in front of one of the photographs, a group of her first students taken 5 years ago. She had been younger then, but her gaze was the same, calm, confident, focused. Many of those people were now working across the country, applying what she had taught them. Some became instructors themselves. Others used their skills in critical situations, saving lives, their own and others. This was her true mark on the world. Not awards, not public recognition, but a chain of influence that rippled outward from her, like ripples from a stone tossed into the water. Walking into her small office next to the training room, she saw a stack of new course applications. Each one represented someone who wanted to learn what she knew. Some came out of curiosity, others after traumatic events, still others at work. But all of them deserved her full attention and the best training she could provide. She sat down at her desk and began reviewing applications, making notes, planning groups, and thinking about how best to structure classes for people of varying skill levels. It was routine work, but she found it rewarding. Every name was an opportunity to change someone's life, to give them the tools that could one day save them. One application caught her eye. A young woman, 23, worked as a night security guard at a hospital. Under reason for training, she wrote a short but eloquent sentence, "Tired of being afraid." Samantha's gaze lingered on those words. She remembered that feeling, the fear that lurked beneath her skin, making every shadow a threat, every unexpected sound a cause for panic. She remembered her father teaching her to transform that fear into awareness, and awareness into power. She took a pen and wrote on the application, "Priority, start with the basics of self-confidence." This girl needed not only physical skills, but also a psychological transformation, from a victim to someone who owns her space. The phone on the desk vibrated. A message from Weston. "Samantha, we have a new contract with the city police. They want you to train 20 officers in non-lethal force enforcement techniques. Interested?" She smiled. This was exactly the kind of work that mattered, educating those who deal with conflict every day, giving them alternatives to violence, showing that control was possible without escalation. There were too many cases where police used excessive force simply because they knew no other options. She could change that. I typed back, "Yes, when do we start?" "Next Monday, morning sessions 3 weeks." "Got it. I'll prepare the program." She put her phone down and opened her laptop, beginning to plan a training session for the police officers. This required a different approach than training private security guards or corporate employees. The officers came with a certain mindset. Many were convinced they already knew everything. Many had bad habits acquired over years of work. Many were skeptical of a female instructor, especially in a context where male dominance was still the norm. But Samantha wasn't afraid of this challenge. She knew the first 15 minutes would be crucial. If she could earn their respect quickly, the rest would go smoothly. If not, she'd lose them, and 3 weeks would be a struggle. Her strategy was simple. Show, don't tell. Take the biggest, most skeptical guy and demonstrate the technique on him. Not humiliate, but convince. Let him feel how the lever works, how a small force at the right point produces a huge result. She typed, delving into the details. A warm-up to reduce resistance, an introduction to the philosophy of minimal force, a demonstration of basic holds, paired practice with gradually increasing resistance, a discussion of ethical dilemmas at the end of each session. She added a module on recognizing escalation, how to read body language, how to notice the moment when someone escalates from verbal aggression to physical, how to intervene before the situation explodes. The hours ticked by. When she looked up, it was already dark outside. The building was empty. Most of the instructors and trainees had gone home. Only the distant sound of a vacuum cleaner in the hallway broke the silence. She saved the document, closed her laptop, and stood up, stretching. Her shoulder muscles were tense from sitting for so long, and she did a few slow circles, feeling the tension melt away. As she was packing, she heard a soft knock on the door. She turned to see Tony Parker standing in the doorway. He looked hesitant, as if unsure whether to disturb her again. "I'm sorry, Miss Fleming. I know it's late, I just wanted to thank you again and ask you something if you have a minute." Samantha nodded, gesturing to the chair in front of the table. "Of course, sit down." Parker sat down, his hands gripping the edge of the chair nervously. "I was thinking about what you said today. About how I have a chance to decide what kind of person I want to be. And I want to be like you, someone who can help others become stronger. I want to ask, is there a chance for me to become an instructor someday? I know that after what happened, it may seem impossible. But if there is a path, I am ready to take it, no matter how long it may be." Samantha studied his face for a few seconds. She saw sincerity in his eyes, but she also knew that sincerity needed to be backed by action. Too many people talk about change, but few are willing to do the work they demand. "Tony, becoming an instructor isn't just about physical skills. It's about character. It's about consistency. It's about being able to lead others even when you're unsure yourself. It's about being a role model every day, not just when someone's watching." She paused, letting the words sink in. "If you're serious, here's what I'm proposing. First, you take the entire basic course again. Not because you don't know the techniques, but because you need to learn them from a different perspective, as a teacher, not as a student. Then you start assisting beginner classes. Watch how I teach, ask questions, learn to spot common mistakes, and how to correct them." Parker listened, nodding at every sentence. After 6 months of assisting, you take the certification exam. It includes a physical test, a theory test, and supervised hands-on training with a group. If you pass all of this, I'll recommend you to the company as a candidate for a junior instructor position. It'll take at least a year, maybe more. The question is, are you ready for it? Parker didn't hesitate for a second. "Yes, I'm ready. I'll do whatever it takes." "Then come tomorrow at 6 in the morning. We'll start with the basics." Surprise flashed across his face. 6 in the morning? "My usual classes start at 8. That's right. This is additional training. If you want to be an instructor, you have to be willing to do more than required. 2 hours before work, every day, 6 days a week. That's the price." She watched him process the information, weighing how much he wanted this. It was the moment of truth. Words are easy, but commitment is heavy. Finally, he nodded, and there was determination in his eyes. "I'll be here, 6 in the morning." "Okay, and Tony, don't be late. Not even a minute. Because if you can't be on time, you can't lead others." "Understood. Thank you, Miss Fleming. You won't regret it." He stood up and walked out, leaving Samantha alone in the quiet office. She stared at the closed door for a few seconds, then smiled. Maybe this guy really would change. Maybe the story in that room would be not just a lesson in what not to do, but the beginning of something good. She turned off the lights, locked the office, and headed for the exit. The night air was cool and refreshing after the stuffy building. Overhead, the stars pierced the city's glow, a reminder that the world was bigger than daily dramas and conflicts. She walked to her car, an old but reliable Honda Civic, which she'd bought back in Texas, and which had served her faithfully all these years. As she got behind the wheel, she paused for a moment, looking at the building behind her. Somewhere out there, in those halls, people would continue to learn, grow, and change. Some would become excellent professionals. Others would leave, unable to cope with the demands. But everyone who went through her program would take with them a piece of what she imparted: discipline, respect, control. She started the engine and drove home through the deserted night streets. A soft jazz tune played on the radio, and she let the music fill the space, not thinking about anything in particular, simply existing in the moment. At home, she cooked a simple dinner: grilled chicken breast with vegetables and a glass of water. No alcohol, no sugar. Her body was an instrument, and she treated it accordingly. After dinner, she did half an hour of stretching, focusing on each muscle group, listening to her body's signals about where there was tension, and where more work was needed. Then a shower, hot and long, washing away not only the physical fatigue of the day but also the emotional. She closed her eyes under the stream of water and allowed herself for a moment to simply be. Not the instructor, not the Marine's daughter, not the woman who defended herself from 4 men. Just Samantha. A person with dreams, fears, hopes. As she lay in bed, her phone lit up with a notification. A message from Marcus Holloway. "Heard you're taking Parker under your wing. Good choice. The guy can shoot if he's properly directed." She smiled and typed back, "Time will tell, but I think he deserves a chance." Everyone deserves a chance. Not everyone knows what to do with it. You're a good teacher, Samantha. Not just of technique, but of life. Thank you, Marcus. That means a lot. Get some rest. It's a long day tomorrow. She put the phone on the nightstand and turned off the light. In the darkness of the room, she could hear the distant sounds of the city. Cars, voices, life that goes on regardless of individual stories. She thought about tomorrow, about Tony Parker, who would, or wouldn't, show up at 6 in the morning, about the police officers she would have to train, about the young woman who was tired of being afraid. Each one was a challenge, each one an opportunity, and Samantha was ready to meet them all with the same calm professionalism that defined every aspect of her life. Before she fell asleep, she whispered a quiet prayer. Not a religious one, but a personal one. Thanking her father for the lessons he had given her, Carlos for the discipline he had instilled, and life itself for the opportunity to do work that mattered. And in that silence, in that darkness, Samantha Fleming found peace, knowing that tomorrow she would wake up and again be who she was created to be. A teacher, a protector, an example of quiet strength in a world that often confuses loudness with power.